I can hear you. Thumbs up. Thumbs up.
Wonderful. So we are, come back here so I can see
We're
you.
starting 12:30.
We're starting now.
Oh,
We're doing
there
it.
we
We're
go.
doing the things. We
Hello.
are so excited for our next session. We have two incredible speakers here with us, distanced, all vaccinated, but distanced
Yes.
here in the chapel. We're following all the rules. We want to keep everyone safe. So we have our own Susan Whitkin, Susan Chandler, you go by both, right? We've got two.
Mhm.
She is a KOA news radio anchor and reporter. She's been in the radio business since college in 1979. She's worked in small markets in Colorado, San Francisco, and Denver, won multiple state and national awards for her news stories and hourly broadcasts. And we have a newer face to Temple Sinai, but we've just been looking around the chapel and checking out the Torahs and all kinds of things. We have Tom Mustin. He is a multi-Emmy award-winning news anchor and reporter, a familiar face to Denver television audiences. Tom has been a go-to journalist for both CBS 4 and Denver 7. In his more than 20 years as a broadcast journalist, he's covered some of the biggest stories in the state, from the Haman fire to historic floods to the Aurora theater shooting. His live coverage anchoring the Democratic National Convention highlighted his team's Emmy award-winning entry for Best Newscast. In all his work, Tom strives for compassion, fairness, and empathy. He and his wife, Carolyn, have 3 children and a Silkie Terrier named Rocky. The dog is very, very important to me. We're not going to leave that out.
That was very thorough.
Well,
Thank you.
we do what we can. We do what we can. So we're going to leave them to it. If you have questions for Susan or Tom, I am going to be back there and have questions coming through. So I can read your questions to them. And they're going to talk to us about how the news has changed.
Right.
Yes.
And the news has
Thank you,
changed.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Coleman.
You can go for it.
Okay, she's messing with our thing in front of us,
Okay.
which is great. We can actually see some people and we can see initials, and that's all really good. Because even though neither of us can ever see our audience, it does help to see other people when
Yes.
we are talking live.
Looks like we have a nice crowd too.
We
Nice.
do so far. We've been in the business almost the same amount of time, and
Yes.
we've seen a lot of changes.
Yes. Well, and we were talking right before we came on here, some good, some bad. And you were talking about a press conference you watched today, how the coverage of stories has changed just since President Trump left office, and now with Joe Biden.
Right. Well, we had the conversation yesterday about how some people have perceived that this administration in office is being treated differently than the former administration, or even all the prior administrations, that they've always changed.
Mhm.
And we're thinking of the antagonistic and the actual feelings that you get when you walk into a room and somebody's already calling you names or calling on you as names, then you already get your hackles up, and then so therefore it already sounds like it is a different coverage. But the questions have always been the same. It's just the feelings of it, the surroundings,
Right.
that the decorum seems to be back.
Exactly. And we were talking about this earlier too, Susan. It's, day one, President Trump came out and said that the press was the enemy of the people. So right off the bat, we were sort of, on our heels, and we were defensive. And unfortunately, that kind of clouded the way we cover President Trump in a way, which is horrible, because as journalists, our job is to present both sides and let the viewer decide. But what happened was it created a lot of news anchors and a lot of reporters who decided to take sides. And that's not what journalism is all about.
So
That's what's changed.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so just take a step back, even when Tom and I started in the business, and it really truly is the sense of we're giving you the facts and only the facts.
Right.
It's almost like Dragnet or something.
Just the facts,
Just
ma'am.
the facts, ma'am.
Joe Friday.
Exactly. And so therefore, news was news, opinion. And as many of you have heard me before, a few years ago when I was speaking in this chapel as well, there are opinions, which you can find in a newspaper on the editorial page, and then the news stories. When you turn on the radio station on KOA radio, you are hearing a talk show. That's an opinion show. It's not my newscast. So that's completely different. But now it's changed a bit.
It has. And what we saw develop over the last 4 years, we had people who call themselves news anchors who are pretty much showmen, and they're pushing an agenda, from Rush Limbaugh to Anderson Cooper, anybody. Those guys, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just don't call yourself a journalist, because it makes us look bad. We're not out there to give our opinions, and you don't want to hear our opinions about things. We're here to be journalists and tell the story. And if we do a story that's trashing the president or someone else, we have to balance it with their side. And what we saw in the last 4 years, a lot of times that didn't happen. And some of those news anchors that like we said, are calling themselves anchors are not. They are performers.
That's
And
right.
even some local ones are the same way. And
That's
that's what's changed, I think, in the last 4 years.
It's nice to have Tom here because he's actually also teaching the next generation of journalists. Tom is a part-time journalism professor at University of Colorado Boulder.
Yes.
And talk about a little bit about your class when you walk in. What one of your first questions that you ask your students?
I do. I ask them what they want to do, and some of them say, I want to be an actress or an anchor. And I tell them, that's not what you say. Okay. First of all, if you want to be a journalist, you start off as a reporter, and if you become an anchor later, that's one thing. But yeah, I think there's a whole generation, Susan, we've talked about this before too, of everyone gets a trophy, and I think I can be an anchor, I think I can be an actress. No, we got into this because we wanted to tell stories. We want to make a difference in people's lives. That's what journalism was about. Shining the light on bad people and just trying to right wrongs. And I always loved being a storyteller, and that's what I love about journalism. Now it's a whole generation of kids who want to get on Instagram and just kind of show themselves on social media, and that's been such a game changer too.
And it's not just righting wrongs or shining the light on anything in particular. It's telling the truth. Here are the facts, and then you get to make the decision. You can make the choice of what you say. But in order for us to do our job, we have to talk to people. We have to
Right.
find out what they're thinking, present them, and then the viewer, the listener, the reader gets to make that decision
Right.
on their own.
And it used to be pretty easy. When you do a story, you get both sides of the story, put it out there, and the listeners, the viewers will decide where they stand on it. It has evolved into, I'm going to do a story about this person, I'm going to just kind of hammer them, which is not good. And getting back to my students, let me just say there are a lot of great students that really get it. So I'm really happy with this new generation. There are kids who understand it's about hard work. That's what journalism is. You're going to work a lot of long hours, and it's not glamorous as it seems, either for radio or TV, as you know, Susan. So there are students, like in any new generation of bankers or lawyers, who want to kind of slide in and not work hard, but there are kids that get it too. So that's been exciting.
And it's interesting on how we approach news. I still take the same approach to what I did in the very beginning to what I do now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because of me and what I'm doing in my internal compass.
Right. Yeah. Well, me too. I still, we will look at our copy we're supposed to read on the air and cringe. I'm like, oh, I can't do this. But I think that's just because we're so conditioned to do it right.
What you're talking about, though, let me interrupt, is that when people say, when you're looking at copy and cringing at it. Okay, so when you're anchoring.
Right.
Okay.
Well, we talked about this yesterday too. A lot of times we'll get a wire service copy, which has been verified all across the country. So any news station can use that copy. And we'll clip it, we'll copy it and put it into the copy and get ready to read it. You go, oh my gosh, there's all kinds of landmines here. I need to fix this.
And the landmines he's talking about are some of the words that are clearly adjectives matter. When you
Right.
describe a situation, you have to be careful that you're not coloring that situation.
Yes. Well, and it's so funny because, it's in TV news, especially more so even than radio. It's all about teases. Like we'll put TV news ads on the radio that tease a story, and I'll hear a story that teases one of my stories, and I'll have to call up the producer, and I'll say, Jeff, yeah, I just heard the tease for our story. Yeah, great. First of all, he's not dead. He didn't verify this, and no one else is as a suspect. Okay, thank you, bye. And he'll say something like, well, but that doesn't really fit into our storyline for the tease. Guys, you still have to get it right. Get the story right. And we'll see copy where there are factual errors, and it's our name or our voice on the line. So you have to care about that. And Susan's really, really good at that. I try to do that too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's really important. I write most of my things, but I will cut and paste some of the wire copy.
Mhm.
But I have to check it. And if I do see something wrong, I will call the national news desk and I'll tell them this
Right.
is not an okay thing to do. So-
Right.
And you can't make people the murderer, maybe alleged,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you can't convict people until they've gone to trial. And that's another thing. And we have young producers who are 22 years old, 23, that just haven't had the reps. And so every day, if any little baby steps I can do to help them get better too is good. So, but it definitely keeps you on your toes, knowing that you can't just sit up there and read the copy anymore like you used to be able to in the 50s or so.
Right.
You know, it's a full-time deal. You're involved in the story. Sometimes you're doing the story yourself.
Right. And if you have any questions, we can't actually see the questions, but Rabbi Jordy is here and she will read them out to us if you have any questions. So something interesting we're talking
Sharon
about.
Whitkin,
That would be my mom. You can say hi to mom.
Hi, Mom. I thought they might be related. Yes.
She's waving.
I see, I see.
That's good.
Barbara, hello. Don't go to sleep, Barbara. She's like she's having fun.
Talking about presenting the facts and when we've done our homework and the way we structure a lot of the news
Mhm.
has sometimes it's changed also because we've got to keep eyes on the
Right.
television and we have to keep ears on the radio.
Yeah, and, you know, in Channel 7 has done something interesting that they decided we're going to try, we're going to do things called contact 7s and 360s. 360s are just longer forms of stories giving you all sides, which you're thinking, okay, as a journalist, you should be given all sides anyway, but it's hard to do it in a minute 15. In these news stories, they're letting you have 350 or more, which in a newscast is only half an hour and it's only 15 minutes of news. That's a lot. It's kind of revolutionary. And they're also doing things where people like you will call in and say, look, you know, I'm having a problem with my plumber, blah, blah, blah. And we'll go out there and be advocates for them. And they've found, they've scripted a lot of studies all across the country and found that's what people want. And if you guys remember 2 years ago, Channel 4 decided we're only going to tell good news. That's all we're going to be doing.
They did it in one of their segments.
Yeah, well, they would start off the newscast with something good. It's called Covering Colorado First. And at first it was kind of interesting, and then it just kind of tanked. Now they're back to covering news again. But what we're saying is it's changed. Things have changed. It's not just the story of the day anymore. It's
Right.
Okay. We have advertisers that might want this, and there's a lot of other things to take into consideration, which depending on how you look at it, is not necessarily the best thing for journalism.
Right.
So-
And when we build newscasts, you right off the top, you think, okay, your lead story, your top story,
Right.
that's the biggest news story of the day. But here in Colorado, I mean, is it going to be a Colorado story?
Right.
Or is it going to be a national story?
Right. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world now. We have a worldwide pandemic, but sometimes we'll lead a newscast with the Broncos because this is a passionate, area for sports, or the Rockies, or whoever, the Nuggets. It used to be if it bleeds, it leads. That was the old expression. If there's the latest murder, that's what we would do. And then Channel 4, even I remember sitting in the meeting saying, we're not going to do that anymore. People don't care about the latest shooting in 5 points. We can mention it somewhere in the story, but we're not going to allocate resources to start off our newscast that anymore, because people in their day want something that
Is relevant to them.
and maybe is uplifting after a hard day to them too. So anyway, it's all about how you figure it out. And some days are different, but
So in radio, I have, and you're in Tom, for all intents and purposes, is my colleague also at the radio station. Not only can you see him on Channel 7, lots of times now.
I fill in whenever Susan's gone, but I love having him. So.
He also gets to come in and
Yes.
work with us at the radio station.
Mhm.
And I think you would even say that you have more discretion over what you put on the air on the radio than you do television, because you're not going through so many bodies.
100%, Susan, exactly.
And
Yeah.
so when I'm writing my newscasts, I have reporters like Tom who will say, okay, I'm doing this, or what else do you need? He'll ask me, what are you looking for? And I'll say, tell him.
And she'll say, I need a vodka tonic, and she sends me out on chairs, but yes.
Exactly. And so I'm putting my own newscast together. I'm writing much of it unless Tom's there or other people, and I'm using their things. I will change things from his
Right.
story sometimes if it fits, whether or not I'm not changing the details, but how it reads.
Yeah, more the way you talk, or just something else that kind of popped into your mind.
Exactly.
It's fun.
But I'm building my newscast also because I'm deciding what I think is important for that half hour, because I'm on every half hour.
Right.
So, which gives me the onus of making sure that I'm being fair, I'm being, and not to use the Fox, but fair and balanced, but really truly balanced in the sense, because if I have a political story, I need to make sure that I have both sides of the aisle represented.
Right.
And I think that's a really important piece. In television, it's different.
Well, it is. And, the thing is, in radio, you are the producer. The buck stops here. Anything that's wrong, you've done. In TV news.
Well, the anchor.
That's
You're
right.
the,
That's right.
you're
When
the
anchoring a
writer,
story.
producing, and starring in my own little
Right.
3-minute newscast.
It's all about Susan and her show. No,
And in real life.
no, in real life, exactly. Matter of fact, can I get you anything, Susan? while we're here? No, but in TV news, you have a meeting with a whole staff of 20 people, talk about stories. Then you have another meeting, and then you have a producer, and it goes through several different channels before it gets to you. Of course, the buck does stop there because I'm the one on the news. I've got to make the changes, but it's gone through a lot of vetting process before. When you're doing your radio program, you are the vetter. You're fighting the stories. You do a lot of it. So, it's just a different set of wheels. But we all, at the end, we are responsible for our copy. So,
But do you find that making the transition from working with all those people at 7, and then you come to our station, how does that work in your head?
it's a lot more work, it feels like, but it also is very freeing because I don't have to make 4 calls to my producer and say, hey, what are you talking about here? I'm talking to myself about it. I understand exactly what I'm talking about. So it comes down to just we're journalists telling a story, and the filters are much less in radio, which is good because I'm hustling out there trying to find stories for my show when I'm on KOA, just like you're doing, and it's a little different in TV news, but it's basically the same. We need to get it right. That's the goal. Tell an interesting story, something our viewers care about, our listeners care about, and get it right. So, and be fair.
Let's go back to your class. When you're talking to your J students, what are their concerns now with news?
Well, it's funny. We just covered the shooting at the King Soopers, which is about 1.5 miles from where our classroom is. And that really affected those kids a lot. As a matter of fact, we talked about it in class. And one of the students afterwards pulled me aside and said, Professor Mustin, I just think that's not fair of you to bring that up. We're all going through a lot here now. And I think it was very disrespectful of you to talk about.
What to talk about?
To talk about this shooting, because it's really hard for us. And I said, you know what, I disagree. I said, I understand where you're coming from, but if this is going to be your career, this is going to be a part of your life. So if this is too intense for you just to even talk about something that you weren't involved in, maybe this is not the right career for you. And she actually wrote me a nice little email afterwards saying, you were absolutely right. It affected me a lot. And I said, when I was covering the Roar Theater shooting, and you were too, Suze, it does affect you. You go home and it's I'm a father, I've got 3 kids, and any one of them could have been at that midnight screening. So, but you have to compartmentalize that when you're on the air or when you're in radio or TV. You've got to be professional and try. And the closest I ever came to breaking down during the story was during 9/11. I was an anchor in North Carolina, and we were getting all this information, and we were on the air for like 15 hours straight. And we were getting new information, and right before break once, it hit me like thousands of Americans are dead. And I couldn't get a hold of my parents. My father worked in the Pentagon at the time, and all the lines were down, and the Pentagon had been hit. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh. And I finally did get a hold of them, thank goodness they were fine. But I remember just thinking, I'm trying to be a professional, but this is just a lot of information coming along. It's about something we didn't ever expect. And so we are humans, we feel everything, but we also are presenting, and representing the station. So we have to kind of be above it.
Which then brings us to it's changed in the sense that it's actually okay to show your feelings as a news anchor, but not your bias.
Yes, and we've talked about, we're not going to mention any names, but there are some local anchors who show their bias quite a bit, and they've become performers pretty much. And I don't know how you all feel about it, but for me, it's you can do that. That's great, but don't call yourself a news anchor, because news anchors don't do that. News anchors get up there and tell you the news. We give you both sides of that story, and that's what they do. They don't tell you, I don't like this. I don't like this person. Can you believe what the president did today? It's not fair.
And you have to be careful. The same people that we're talking about, it's not just reading it on the air, but it's also in the social media, which is so new to it.
Yes.
That has opened up a whole nother Pandora's box for journalists.
Yes.
Because we're encouraged to be on social media.
Right.
But there's a line if you liked something from somebody on a Facebook page or a Twitter or something, A, you could lose your job, and B, then you can show your bias.
Right.
So why are we on Twitter? Why
Yes.
are we on Facebook? Why are we on Instagram? To show our little dogs, to show our families cooking and
That's
getting
part of
along.
it, yes.
I mean, that's really truly what it's about, because we're supposed to get a lot of people to look at us. But then you're like, no, I want to stay under the radar. This is not okay.
Yeah, it's such a double-edged sword, Susan. That's a good point. You know, when you first started, when we did a story, we would get out the yellow pages or make calls and maybe show up in an area. That's how we got our information. Now you pick up Twitter. Oh, okay, yeah, I got all this information now. The trouble with that is you're not vetting everything.
Right.
And we've heard stories about people getting fired for retweeting tweets of things like you just mentioned that are not quite true. There are a lot of great things about social media, like Twitter gives us instant information from like the police department,
Right.
which is good. But yet we're also told, in TV news, that people want to show that you're human. So show a picture with your wife and family and dog and doing all this. Where do you draw the line?
Mhm.
The other day, an anchor at one of the other stations was talking about, hey guys, I'm live now. Should I have cornflakes or Cheerios for breakfast? Let me know. And I'm thinking, okay, how does that, I've wasted 10 minutes of my life. I'll never get back again. And how does that help anybody? So yes, if you're live on a scene somewhere and you want to show some scene video and show people, that's great. But to talk about cornflakes versus, Cheerios or
Right.
Captain Crunch, no.
And
So there is a tricky line there.
And honestly, I don't want to be showing my kids and my husband. That's why I have a
Yep.
different last name on the air.
Yes,
To be
yes.
really honest. And I work with people whose children they talk about, but it's not really their names.
Yeah,
And they're using a different name for their kid because we want to keep that
right.
out of the limelight.
Well, Susan Whitkin, yeah, you have a different name.
Right.
My,
But
my,
mostly you guys all meet.
my old, yeah, come on, shh, don't tell anyone. My old co-anchor, Kathy Walsh, has a different last name, but she keeps Kathy Walsh.
Well, because that was her maiden name.
Right,
And I've known
exactly.
Kathy since I was Susan Whitkin before I became Susan
Yes.
Tamlin.
So, Kath, it's right. And I will tell you one quick story. When I was in North Carolina, I had a death threat one time. I got off the air and my little light was bleeping on my phone. I picked it up and the guy said, "Hey, Tom, I know where you live. I'm going to kill you." Next thing I know, the police came and I had a sheriff follow me home for a month. And my wife is like saying, "Tom, we had 2 little kids and like my daughter was just born. She was like 8 months old." And my wife's saying, "What? I don't feel safe at all." So there is a weird vibe, but I would say, when you are a journalist, you're out there, and that kind of comes with the territory. So I try to be as trustworthy and honest as I can on the air. And if people have problems with me, I'm happy to talk to them about that.
Mhm.
But there is that creepy kind of element. So I certainly understand why some people don't want to use their name and don't want to show their family.
Exactly.
So
Again, if you guys have any questions. Oh,
We
Rabbi
do
Jordan
have a
says we
question.
some
Well, I
questions.
have like 7 of my own,
Well, you
but
can-
I'll get there. So Gary Eisenberg says that in recent years, I think you can hear me, in recent years, TV reporters, nameless, are now having their opinion quoted. This was verboten years ago. Do you see this violation of boundaries too?
we've talked about it. Yeah, that's a great question. Sure, I do. If you're giving an opinion on an issue that you're a journalist and you're covering, that's a violation of, in my opinion, being the journalistic ethics.
And I don't
So-
think I'd ever
Yeah.
mention and say, well, Tom Mustin on Channel 7 said this. I
Tom
think
Mustin
that's-
doesn't like this new bill in the House.
Yes. What is Tom? We don't
Yeah.
care about that.
We don't care about what Tom Mustin.
Right.
Well, maybe you do, but
Yeah.
Tom Mustin should be sharing that kind of information. So
Right.
I try anyway to be as unbiased as possible. We were talking about some other people tweeting really bad things about certain political leaders.
Right.
And I think that dilutes your power as an anchor.
Well, first of all, it colors, we then know that your opinion is this.
Right.
When you're supposed to come in. Now, we all understand that we're all human and we all have baggage that we bring into the
Mhm.
room. But I try to leave my baggage and my biases at the door,
Yes. and
which is so important to be able to do.
I'm going to toot her horn really quickly. Mandy Connell is a great, she has a show on KOA. And someone called in because you were talking about something, Susan. And they called in to say, I just want to compliment Susan Whitman because I can't tell if she's a Republican or a Democrat at all. And you thought that was,
Yeah, it was great.
it was great because she
good
told a
information.
story and you couldn't see any kind of bias there,
Right.
which is what good journalists do. And that's why I'm learning every day from Susan Whitman.
And yeah, it's the mutual admiration. So Rabbi Jordan,
Well, it's so funny. I have many questions as I'm sitting here listening to you. And
can you guys all hear?
You should
Rabbi
be able to
Jordan?
hear me. I am like right up.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes.
as you're talking about that, about, not being able to know where you stand, I see a lot of comparison to some of the work that we do as rabbis, right? We live in a country with a separation of church and state. If you ask a rabbi to ask a question, you get a sermon too. So this is my apology. But I wonder, one of my professors at one point said to me about this, he said, well, if you don't stand for anything, right? If you don't say anything, you don't stand for anything. And so how do you balance that, right? Do you feel some kind of responsibility to say something? How are you neutral while still saying something?
So that's really, really a good question, because I work with, as Tom mentioned, I work with Mandy Cottle, who is an opinion talk show. You know where she stands on issues. And in my newscast on her show, you will never know where I stand on any issue, or I hope you won't, because I will try to be the most fair and give you all the facts that at least I have at the moment for a story. That said, if there is time in between her show and that, I get the luxury of that. In when she's throwing to me for a newscast, not in my newscast, but outside of it, I can talk about things. For instance, just last week, they were talking about people who've been vaccinated, but still will wear their mask and want to wear their mask. And
it's
really
and I have my mask on. We're socially distanced in here.
We've all had our shots, but we do it.
And we're socially distanced, so we can be in the same room by CDC. But when I walk out of the synagogue today, I will have my mask on if I go to the grocery store, because I feel better about myself, because I don't know about the other people who are vaccinated. So that I'm giving my opinion about that, but I'm very careful. I don't do it on hot button topics.
Yes.
I just won't do it.
Well, the way I get around
publicly.
This is a great question. The way I get around it is, if I have a question about something, rather than me saying, well, I got a question about, I don't understand. You get somebody else in authority to give their opinion on it, and then have them say it. That's the way you get around it as a journalist. But there's an old saying, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So yes, we certainly have our own opinions about things, but when we have our journalism hats on, we got to make sure it's other people telling it.
Right. But again, you're not going to see Tom on Twitter liking or disliking or giving his opinion, because then it colors people who are watching him, and it colors their opinion of him. So we can't do that. Does that answer your question?
Totally.
Yeah.
Highly relatable.
Well, and I also, my wife is like, the keeper of it. She checks everything I do. So, hey, what were you saying in this thing? Things I won't even think about. The other day, I made a joke about J-Lo and A-Rod breaking up, and I wrote something about he's being checked for performance-enhancing drug. I thought it was kind of funny. And she said, get that off right now, because people don't understand that. So, gone.
Was that on social media?
I put it on Twitter as a joke. I retweeted something and just wrote it later. I wonder if he's being, which was stupid. And the trouble is, once you pop something out there on Twitter or Facebook or wherever, or Instagram, someone will screenshot it. So even if you get rid of it, it haunts
still
you.
there.
And that's why we were talking about this. A local weather person lost his job because of that. He kind of retweeted something, made a little comment, and it just rubbed a lot
and
the
it
wrong way.
snowballed from there.
Yes. Yeah.
We've got questions coming.
Okay.
So fun.
We have answers, Rabbi.
And if we don't,
So,
we'll make them up.
Scott,
Just kidding.
Scott says, as journalists, do you have any recommendations on the disinformation, also the conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism?
Wow.
Yeah,
Super.
light one, huh?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Whoa,
So do we have one more time, Ruben?
As journalists, do
Yeah.
you have any recommendations on the disinformation, also the conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism?
Yeah, do I have theories about it, or how do I feel about it? I think it's if anti-Semitism is obviously unacceptable anywhere, and I think we're becoming in some ways a more tolerant nation now. I think there's a
Tolerant or intolerant?
I think we're getting, let's just say we're becoming more aware of issues. There are factions of people that are always anti-Semitic or whatever, which are horrible, but the question is, how do we feel?
I think do you have recommendations on the disinformation? I think, and Scott, tell me if we're off here. I think what Scott is asking about is, how do we find our way through when there's so much noise out there?
So that's a good,
I think that's your question, Scott.
Yeah.
Rabbi, can you hear us?
How do we find our way? You have to, first of all, muddle your way through and really understand that there's so much misinformation and disinformation. And it's not just coming from in our country, it is coming from outside influences.
Yes.
And that's been documented. I mean, don't say that it hasn't. It has been. And there's anti-anything. You have to be able to learn how to shut it off and shut it down.
The follow-up question from Scott is, how can journalists do something to change this?
Oh,
What can
yes.
journalists do to address this is what we're seeking.
So that's really important, because for us to get the facts, again, it all comes down to, and unfortunately, like, let's take the pandemic. The facts have changed. This is we're in new territory with this virus,
It's been a
right?
year of new territory. Yes.
Right?
Right.
So you're going through, so you have to realize, people say, well, we're following the science. Well, the science tells us well, then the science changes. That's what science is.
Yeah.
I mean, truly, if you look at it, right? I
Right.
mean, you look at an experiment and you go, oh, that didn't go quite well.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the drawing board. People have to understand that. People have to go and be educated. Unfortunately, education, that's how I got into this business to begin with. You said how you were doing it to tell a story. For me, it was to give people facts and information so that they can make up their mind on how to conduct themselves, or at least to know what's going on the planet.
Well, I'm not comfortable sharing any story on the air, whether it's radio or TV, that I'm not 100% sure about. And if I'm not sure about it, I will make sure I attribute everything I'm saying to someone else who is saying it.
Right.
But there are a lot of crazy conspiracy theories out there. There's a lot of everything, and you just have to be very careful. One of the things at KOA we do is ABC News Call has a lot of stories we can use. And sometimes I'm reading these going, I'm not doing the story because it's totally biased one way. So I think, like what Susan said, is the same. You just have to do your homework and be diligent about every story you cover. And if you have a problem with it, it's your name or your voice on the line. So you got to just tell the person, I'm not comfortable reading this like it is.
Right.
And change it.
And luckily, so that you also understand, we at KOA have several sources. ABC is one, Fox News is another. So we really do go for the balancing act. So we really do try to get all of the information. And to be honest, you can look at journalists from both sides and see and hear the adjectives. And back to that word, because you have to be so careful.
You can be telling all the facts, but the way you say it shows a bias. I told you this story yesterday. There's a famous story. Katie Couric a few years ago was interviewing the then vice president candidates. It was Sarah Palin and it was Joe Biden. Those were the two. And it was fine. She interviewed all of them, just trying to make the country get to know them a little bit. Every time they did what's called a cutaway, which is news, is when the camera comes and shows the anchor, the interviewer, the reporter. Every time that Joe Biden said something, they would do a cutaway of Katie. She was like smiling, hey. Every time they did a cutaway with Sarah Palin, she was like this.
Mm-hmm.
And she got a lot of flack for that because people said, hey, we saw what you're doing. She said, what are you talking about? I said, look at it. It was a very subtle, body language type thing, but everybody knew right there that she was not pulling for that Republican side. And that kind of hurt her for several years after that. We can't do that as journalists. We can't do that. And if I were Katie watching that, I would have said, hey, that cutaway, no, let's not use that.
Right. The words still are the same coming out of
Right.
the candidate,
But the way,
but don't
people saw it.
show your bias in how you're handling it.
and let's face it, we all do have a bias, but that's what we have to do as journalists. We can't show it on the air. And like the other day when that listener called in and said, Susan, I couldn't tell what you were leaning there. That's a real compliment. It is. That's what good journalists do. So,
Thanks.
yes.
Rabbi Jordy?
We've got a question from Marty Midas. Marty said, when I started in journalism, we couldn't show tattoos on a chef. Obviously that's changed, because I don't know if you can find a chef without a tattoo at this point.
Right.
Obviously that's changed.
Or a piercing.
Yes.
Well, yes. How do you avoid making mistakes that won't offend people and make you the news?
Is it about tattoos, or?
I think in general.
See his big
How do you-
anchor.
How do you avoid?
I've got Ron Burgundy right here on my bicycle. No.
How do you avoid making mistakes that won't offend people and make you the news?
Well, it's every day, it's that balance. We have to do that.
Yeah.
It's, sometimes I've ad-libbed things, just when I used to do the morning show for 4 years, and it's more of a looser format.
Right, because people are waking up and they want to be
Yeah,
happy.
you're kind of,
That's-
and we would chit chat, like we're doing now. And I would say things I thought were kind of funny, and someone would take it wrong. I said, man, this is crazy weather. I remember saying it to Stacey Dawson. It's crazy weather. Someone sent me a long email, called our general manager saying I was making fun of people with disabilities. And I actually called the guy because he left his number. I said, okay, I see what you're saying, but that's not my intention at all. I don't have any problem. I have some friends. I have a lot of friends
You
here.
didn't call it disabled weather.
I should have said, I almost said schizophrenic weather. That would be worse, But anyway, the thing is, every day it is a balancing act. So the way I look at it in my mind is if it's right up at the line, if you're thinking like, oh, should I say that? Don't say it. That's okay.
But you have to be thinking.
Well,
and that's
no,
where
the
sometimes-
wheels are always turning,
Yeah.
sometimes faster than our mouth is going, so, yeah. But to answer your question, it is a balancing act every day because you're on the air and you can always say something that could be offensive to somebody.
And you don't mean to be.
So,
and
but-
sometimes you always have to give a disclaimer. Okay,
Yeah.
this is just me talking about, yes, I am going to wear the mask in a grocery store because I don't know if other people have been vaccinated. Get it? Yeah. It's
Right,
like-
right. I mean,
And then I get calls.
Well-
Well, I don't agree with her. Okay, that's okay. That's my opinion.
the anti-vaxxers, I think, have me on speed dial because every time I do a newscast, I get like 4 calls from these guys. If you don't want to get your shot, that's fine. I'm just telling you, the CDC and all these people are saying, get your shot.
Right.
I'm just going by what they're saying and wear your mask. So I'm not saying you have to. It's America. Yeah, it is America. It is. The guys are saying we're taking away their freedom, whatever. I'm just repeating what people are telling me. So I've had my shot. If that makes me, leaning to one side, so be it.
Any others?
Oh, I have a question.
Okay.
I'm next in line. So, you're talking a lot about changes to the news that are fairly recent. You're talking really sort of like the last 5-10 years.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about some of the changes like of the 90s or arguably earlier about a move to a 24-hour news cycle and the way that the O.J. Simpson trial changed the news.
That was
And
big.
What do you think we're still feeling the effects of that? Do you think that we'll ever shift to anything but what we have now?
Well,
It's getting faster and faster.
yeah.
I mean, with the advent again of the social media. I mean, it's a 24-hour news cycle was invented by essentially Ted Turner with CNN.
Right.
I mean, he was the first, right? And he brought it on and it was huge. And that was through television. Radio was the other, we were always 24/7, actually, if you think about it. I mean, we always had the 24/7-hour news cycle. We had if you wanted news in print, and that's why print is pretty much gone and it's online. We have the 2 newspapers in Denver.
Right.
And you had to wait for the television news to come on
Mhm.
and then they would get it. By then it was late, it was old, it wasn't news.
Right.
Now it's a problem because everything is, if you see the scroll, everything is breaking news, even though it wasn't breaking, it was yesterday. So that vernacular is
Yeah.
misused,
Yes.
unfortunately. Is it going to go away? No, it's not only going away, it's getting faster. Twitter, like he was saying, we get a lot of our information from the police departments. They used to have PIOs, public information officers, that would meet you out at the scene of the
Mhm.
crime. And then you would get the information. Now the PIOs, you don't even have to show up to the scene of the crime.
Right.
You just look on Twitter and you all can do it too. You can just, if you're on
Yeah.
Twitter, you just have to search for Denver Public or
Right.
Denver Police Department,
Jefferson
and
County Sheriff's Office.
Jefferson County
Right.
Sheriff's Office, and find out the very latest about what's happened at that scene. And it's there. We don't
Yeah.
even have to leave the news department.
Well, all my students, I always ask them the first day, okay, who here watches the news? If I'm, no one, crickets. When they want something, they pick up their phone right away and they get it right away. So the days of the 5 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news, and 10 o'clock news and TV are going out the window. That's 10 years from now, I doubt there will be that. The days of everyone sitting around, the radio or the whole family sitting around watching the news is gone. And I actually was an intern at KBC in Los Angeles during the OJ trial. And I actually got to go to Camp OJ when they covered it. And that was a real eye opener to me too. It was a 24-hour cycle. They had people coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning doing a different shift there. And it was really interesting. And I remember thinking, gosh, these celebrity trials that kind of started the whole thing about having the 24-hour news cycle, like you were saying. And I think it is here to stay. And I think because of that, it's really hurt the local TV news scene.
And
So-
that's also going back to one of the questions. That's where a lot of misinformation comes out of, because you're not able to verify fast enough. And so
Right.
people are speculating what may have
Right.
happened. They don't know for sure, but it could be this. Well, that's not okay.
Yeah, no, it's not. And we've had that, we've been watching, like I'm covering a story at Channel 4 or Channel 7, and we'll see Fox come out and say some information that the police have told us not to say. But they're the first ones out there saying it, so that's great. So yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother angle we're going on here, but everything has changed. There's a pressure to be first and get on the air with it, but you also have to vet things. And so.
And there's a pressure to report everything. And you shouldn't, in my opinion, and let's go back to several minutes ago, which was Tom was talking about, it used to be if it bleeds, it leads. In my newscast, you will rarely hear talking about a murder or a shooting in an area that, who cares? Really doesn't affect you. A reporter will come to me, it could be Tom, it could be somebody else, and say, hey, there was a shooting in, mention the area, metro area, and I'll say, okay, is the person dead and do we know them? Were they a celebrity? Were they a politician? Were they somebody who everybody can recognize and know? Because if not, my listeners don't care. What affects them? What do they want to know? And so I have to, because I only have 3 minutes to give information, and I have to get rid of stuff that doesn't pertain to most people.
Right. Yeah, you got to make it relevant to the view. That's for sure. Yeah, and interesting. And so yeah, but again, it's there are some anchors there at KOA that like to do the crime stuff.
Absolutely, they love it, and that won't be in my newscast, but it could be in this.
It's everyone has a different personality too. So yeah, and I'm more along with Susan. I'd rather tell a story that's more universal. That's kind of interesting. Yes.
So Nancy and Gary asked, are there written rules about reporters not giving their opinion while giving the news? And if not, how can the boundary problem be fixed?
I don't think there's any written rules. I just think as a journalist, you kind of know ethically what is right and what's not right. And it's not about you. The story is not about you. It's about whoever is involved in the story and telling their story. So I cringe when I see reporters and anchors giving opinions. But again, like the Anderson Coopers of the world, that's kind of what they do now.
Yeah, because he's not a news anchor.
He calls himself an anchor, but he's a personality.
Okay, can we call him then an opinion anchor? He's not a new anchor. To me, is now actually going away. It's just a talking head.
Yes.
There's a news person, and then there's an opinion person.
Yeah.
And that's really what we've come down to. Don Lemon and Brett Baer, they're opinion people.
Right.
They're not news people.
Yeah. And so there's a difference there. Yeah, for sure.
Right? I mean,
so the answer is there's nothing written in stone. There's not a rule that says, okay, Tom, you cannot say your opinion.
It's not like a medical doctor who has to decide what is the Hippocratic
Yeah,
oath.
on page 3 of the journalist code, it says, do not give your opinion. No, there's nothing like that. You just know that that's not your job. Your job is not to give your opinion.
Although, are you, as Professor Mustin, are you teaching your students that?
I am teaching them that, and they're getting it. They understand. And that's why I'm so encouraged by this next generation of journalists, because they get it. And I keep telling them, guys, present both sides of a story and let the viewer decide. That's what you do. Okay. So, and I think they understand, because their assignments they're giving me now, they're balancing it out. So
good.
Who knows?
So with just the volume of content that's out there, do you think that there's legitimately enough news to fill the amount of space we're filling, or do you think we're creating stories?
Well, they're always asking for enterprise stories wherever you are, whether it's KOA or Channel 7. I think there are a lot of stories out there. I think we're seeing a trend now towards like uplifting stories. That's why people like Steve Hartman on the road and CBS, every Friday he does a story in some little tiny town all across the country, just a little kind of feel good story about things. And people like that. During the pandemic, we want something to uplift our spirits. So there's been a change, I think, lately in this last year, especially, to tell some uplifting kind of stories.
And not just that, I mean, we are a planet now. We don't always, we get the news very quickly here from everywhere. And I think it's important, in my opinion, and truly, and you'll see that in my newscast, to show what's going on in the world. I mean, when the big ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, right then I saw that and I went, wow. And somebody in the newsroom said, well, why did you put that in there? I said, this is very big. And it turned out to be even bigger than we first thought.
Because it stayed there for a while.
Exactly. Yeah. So to me, reporting on other things that are going on in other places of the planet, it's important to know that we're just not here in Denver, Colorado, or the United States of America. We play part of the world in general.
Yes.
And that's part of, that's my bias coming in as trying to be an educator to the masses.
Yes. And TV too, we've been covering nothing but coronavirus, for the last year, and people are burned out. So they're desperate for something that affects everybody that's not coronavirus related. And that Suez Canal was a perfect example. I was fascinated by that story. I mean, this giant cargo tanker stuck in the mud that's stopping,
Right.
distribution across the world.
And how did it get stuck, and
Yeah.
how does it affect everybody,
Yeah,
and what
so-
does it do? I mean, it's fascinating, but it's not just, so it's that story. So is there enough news? Oh yeah, there's plenty of
There's
news.
always
Is
news.
it always bad news? No.
No.
I mean, thank goodness, it's not always bad news.
If they told us we needed to spend a week doing only stories about Temple Sinai, we could find stories. we could do devote 2 days just to the rabbi here.
That's
But
right.
So there is always enough news. There's plenty of news. Whether it's
Whether you like it
yeah,
or not.
whether you consider it newsworthy
Well.
is a different deal. But
Exactly.
yes, we can put some stuff out there for sure.
So Karen asked, when presenting both sides of a story and wanting to treat each side equally, how do you handle a situation when one side involves demonstrably false information?
Oh, that is so great. Okay, so
Karen,
I
that's a
love
tough
that.
one.
That's a great, no, to me, it's really easy. You let the demonstrably false information giver say it. So it's a perfect example. I have, and I won't name the person, and I have it still on my desktop, the sound bites of this person who said these things that were so outrageous. And it's great. I'm not going to interpret what they said. I'm not going to even paraphrase. I'm going to play that sound. And when you hear it, you can see, you just go,
Right.
oh my gosh, how can that person say it? And that's okay. And then you bring in the next person who says, well, we don't quite see it that way. I can introduce it, or I can say, or Representative so-and-so said this to count. I don't even have to use the word to counter that.
Right.
Because again, I'm coloring that. Why would I say to counter that when I can just say so-and-so said this? And in your thought bubble, you can hear or counter that or not.
Yeah.
But, and you play that sound and you can go, well, that's at least the voice of reason. You get to make that decision, but it's fabulous to be able to have that. That to me, that's a gift of that kind of a story, when you have the actual sound from the people who are just crazy and not so crazy.
You let their sound tell the story itself. And you
Absolutely.
could even say Senator Jones disagreed and have their sound bite. But yeah, in that kind of situation, the best you can do, like Susan said, is just let them tell the story first. So it's not you saying it, it's them saying it, and the people can decide right away.
Oh, I
So,
love that. That's a gimme. That's like, that's awesome. That's a blessing in my
Karen, you
in my
made
world.
Susan's day. Thank you. Great question.
And if you want to hear the crazy soundbite.
Yes, she has it on her desk. So come on.
So I'll ask another question, and then if we maybe have one more from our crew on here. But in the last year, you were talking a little bit about the pandemic, and it's been such an unsettled year, and no one's really known which way was up. And so what has that been like for you as people who have a voice and have a platform, and everyone's looking for some kind of guidance through what felt really unrooted? What has that been like?
One of the things I try to do is I always say, guys, you want the people, your viewers, to understand you're going through the same thing they are. And so it has been it's been a burnout type year, because then we had all the Black Lives Matter, the riots, and all this social unrest along with the pandemic. So it has been tough. And the only thing I'm doing, I'm just trying to be truthful in the way I'm telling the stories, and just letting folks know that I hear what they're saying. That's the only thing you can do.
Right. And I've been very blessed to be able to actually go into work in a socially distant way.
Yes.
And to me, that has helped me in my sense of being able to get on with my job, to talk to a lot of different people, to talk to the professionals, to put out the information.
Yes.
That's been a really good thing for me in the radio station.
Yeah, it's been an unusual year, unlike any other year of my career, because we'll go into KOA and you have 10 floors that are empty and there's 2 people in there. It's been strange. So I think we're all kind of feeling like we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel now. So we feel like we've all been through something together. I think people can see that. I think that they can listen to you and understand you're understanding, you're empathetic with them.
And the same thing with Channel 7, though. You see people now coming back in from their homes, and everybody's on the set, right?
Well, it's still pretty empty there. It'll be, when I'm anchoring a show, I'm the only one there, and there's maybe a producer producing from our home, and maybe one kind of engineer there. That's it. there might be 5 people in a giant newsroom at any one time. And same with KOA. Gosh, we're
Right,
there.
well,
you know,
that's different,
I'm
yeah,
working overnight, and I'm the only one there.
right,
So,
it's
yeah.
always like that. But
yes, I thought it was something I said.
As someone who spent months and months standing there in this room empty leading services, I get that experience.
Yeah,
a
and
little
it's,
bit.
and
Yes,
it's
of
been,
course, for you too.
but
Rabbi,
the
yes.
world has gone through this together. So that in and of itself is, this is our new world. This is our new reality. People say, well, are we going to go back to the old? Well, there's no more going back to the old way of doing things in our business or in your business.
Yeah, it's,
This is the change, and life changes. Let's move on.
yes.
Let's, you know.
But that's a
get
whole
on
other
with
thing too. TV news has changed forever because they realize that I can take my cell phone and anchor a newscast from my living room. I don't need 4 engineers. I don't need an audio person. So it's cost jobs now. And so everything, there's a lot of things that have happened during the pandemic that will stay changed.
Right.
People running lean and mean
Right.
stations. That's what we were doing.
I mean, there's a lot of changes that will come out of this, and the way we do things, our businesses and your businesses.
Yep.
So I would maybe ask one final question for us to end it on. Thank you. I'm loving this. I could sit and listen to the two of you all day long. But for the people who say,
Which, by the way, I don't want to interrupt too much, but I want you to know the discussions we have in newsrooms are like this. We vet what's going on. That we
Yes.
take our jobs really seriously.
No,
And-
we've had some of these exact same discussions. And I love talking to Susan about it
Well,
because
with Tom and I, and with everybody,
Yeah.
we do this. What's right? What should we lead with?
Right.
How do we present this? Do we have all the facts? These are conversations that we have because we do take our
right,
jobs
because we
seriously.
care. Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay, so
You're
I'm
right.
Rabbi Jordy.
I think that's a really beautiful way to end. I think it's really clear that you both take this so seriously. And especially as we're seeing so much opinion sharing as opposed to news reporting. It's really wonderful to hear from the two of you who are prioritizing news and not opinions.
Well, Rabbi, and for me, it's such a privilege to be a journalist. And I just say, if you're going to be a journalist, do it right and take it seriously. Because you know what, we're not working construction, we're not doing these other hard jobs. We're journalists, and it's a whole different ballgame. For me, I've just felt like, boy, I'm playing with house money. I'm doing what I love.
And it's been
So
great. And it used to be where if you were to go to a war zone, which I've been, and you had a Red Cross or you were a journalist, you were immune to being hurt. And that's changed. When you're a journalist now, you're a target.
Right.
And that's not okay. And that's also changed how we have gone out into the field and are being careful. It really is, it can be a liability. And it's not, nobody should be looking at that. Nobody should be able to attack you for what
No.
you do.
We'll close with Leslie's words because she says it better than me. She said, this has been very enlightening. So happy to hear there's honesty and integrity. Thank you. So we thank you both. Thank you for being here. We are going to shift just in a moment. There's going to be a little bit of quiet time because we're running out of devices and hands to put the weight screen and music through because we're just doing a lot here today. We're in the chapel, but in the sanctuary, we have a number of our young, talented Sinai musicians who are working on some really incredible music for our next hour. So we're going to pause. Unlike, this is going to be very un-Zoomathon for nothing on the screen and no music, but we're all going to make it. Thank you to Susan and Tom.
Yes.
Hang tight, don't
Awesome
go
talk, guys.
anywhere. We're going to have our next program very, very shortly.